Boston, 2025. Morning light filtered through the high windows of Massachusetts General Hospital's archives as Emily Parker examined a newly discovered box of photographs. The hospital's upcoming anniversary exhibition had prompted a thorough review of historical materials, revealing forgotten treasures tucked away for decades. Among the sepia-toned images, one photograph stood out. 7 doctors in white coats posed formally on the hospital's front steps. The back bore an inscription, April 17th, 1914, first successful cardiac procedure team. Emily noted the names, Dr. James Harrington, Dr. Frederick Mills, Dr. Henry Carter, Dr. William Peterson, Dr. Robert Young, Dr. Michael Thompson, and Dr. Thomas Wilson. Nothing seemed unusual until Emily cross-referenced the photograph with the hospital's death records. Her breath caught when she discovered Dr. Thomas Wilson's death certificate, clearly stating he had died at 4:17 a.m. on April 17, 1914, hours before the photograph was taken. Dr. Reed, "Look at this," Emily called to her colleague. Wilson died that morning, yet here he is in the photograph. Dr. Nathan Reed examined the image closely. "Notice how stiff Wilson appears compared to the others? And how his eyes look? Painted? Are you suggesting—" Emily began. "A postmortem photograph," Reed confirmed. It was common practice back then, especially for significant occasions. Emily studied Wilson's face more carefully, now noticing the subtle signs, the unnatural stillness, the slightly different quality of his gaze, the way his colleagues stood positioned to support him. She had stumbled upon a remarkable artifact, a team so determined to honor their fallen colleague that they included his body in their moment of triumph. "I need to understand why they did this," Emily said. "Why was Wilson so important that they went to these lengths?" Reed nodded thoughtfully. Postmortem photography was common for families, but in professional settings, it was reserved for truly exceptional circumstances. There must be more to this story. Emily gently placed the photograph in an acid-free sleeve. What had begun as routine archival work had transformed into a mystery spanning over a century, one that connected modern medical practice to a time when the boundaries between life and death, remembrance and separation, were understood very differently. "I'll start with Wilson's personnel records," she decided. "Oh, there has to be something that explains why his colleagues insisted on his presence, even after death." Reed watched her with growing interest. "You found something truly unique, Emily. This photograph is more than a curiosity. It's a window into how our predecessors viewed death, collegiality, and medical achievement." Emily immersed herself in hospital records the following day, pulling Thomas Wilson's personnel file from the archives. His professional history was impressive. Harvard Medical School graduate in 1902, joined Mass General in 1905, specialized in emerging thoracic surgery techniques. Colleagues described him as brilliant, dedicated, and tireless. But these standard records revealed little about why his team had honored him so extraordinarily. The breakthrough came when Emily discovered Dr. Harrington's personal journals, donated to the hospital after his death in 1951. Harrington, as Wilson's closest colleague, had documented their work together extensively. The entries painted a compelling portrait of Wilson as both a visionary surgeon and a man racing against his own mortality. March 3rd, 1908. Wilson confided in me today about his heart condition, a congenital defect that has troubled him since childhood. The irony is not lost on him, a cardiac specialist with a failing heart. He believes this personal affliction has sharpened his determination to conquer the surgical challenges of the heart. "I'm in a race," he told me, "between my own mortality and my work." Emily discovered that Wilson had spent years developing techniques for cardiac repair, specifically for traumatic injuries. In an era when most surgeons considered the heart untouchable, Wilson had methodically created specialized tools and suturing approaches designed for cardiac tissue. As she read further, she learned Wilson had suffered increasingly frequent cardiac episodes in the months before his death, yet continued working with growing urgency. April 10th, 1914. Wilson spoke with unusual candor today. His latest cardiac episode was severe. "My heart is failing more rapidly than I expected," he admitted. "But Providence has placed Blackwood's case before us at this exact moment. The knife wound to his right ventricle is precisely the type of injury I've been preparing to repair. If we can save him, everything changes for cardiac surgery." The final entries provided the context Emily had been seeking. April 17th, 1914, 5:30 a.m. Wilson was found unresponsive in the doctor's quarters at 4:05 this morning. Despite our best efforts, he was pronounced dead at 4:17 a.m. The cruel timing is unbearable. Today was to be his triumph with the Blackwood procedure. After the shock subsided, we unanimously agreed to proceed with the surgery, following Wilson's meticulously documented protocols, and we succeeded. Blackwood will survive. After the operation, we decided Wilson should be included in our commemorative photograph. His body may have failed this morning, but his mind, his innovations, his vision succeeded fully. Including him was not merely sentimental, it was truthful. Emily sat back, moved by what she'd discovered. Wilson had died on the very day his life's work would be validated. his techniques proven successful in saving a patient with a wound previously considered fatal. His colleagues hadn't simply propped up their deceased friend out of tradition. They had insisted on his presence because the triumph belonged to him as much as to those who had physically performed the surgery. Emily arranged a meeting with Dr. Margaret Hammond, a retired pathologist and medical historian specializing in early 20th century medical practices. They met in the hospital's wood-paneled library, the 1914 photograph between them. "What you found is a remarkable example of post-mortem photography in a professional context," Hammond explained, examining the image through a magnifying glass. "Most people today associate these photographs with Victorian family portraits, parents with deceased children, that sort of thing. But the practice extended well into the 1920s and included professional commemorations like this. Was it really that accepted?" Emily asked, still struggling to reconcile the photograph with modern sensibilities. "You have to understand how different the relationship with death was then," Hammond replied. "Death typically occurred at home, not in hospitals. Families washed and prepared their own dead. Bodies remained in the home for days with visitors paying respects. Death was visible, tangible, integrated into daily life." From her briefcase, Hammond produced a folder containing examples of postmortem photography, spanning from the 1840s through the 1920s. Photography was expensive in its early decades. For many families, especially in rural areas, a death might prompt the only photograph ever taken of a loved one. The images showed a progression of styles. Early photographs of deceased infants arranged as if sleeping, family groups with a deceased member positioned among the living, individuals photographed in standing positions, supported by hidden frames. "Note how the earlier photographs made little attempt to disguise death," Hammond pointed out. By the early 1900s, however, there was more emphasis on creating a lifelike appearance, adding color to the cheeks, painting eyes on the photographs, positioning the body to suggest life. And in professional contexts, Emily asked, "For significant figures in an organization, inclusion in commemorative events after death was seen as a continuation of their contribution. In medical settings specifically, there was perhaps less discomfort with the physical reality of death, given doctors' regular exposure to it." Hammond examined Wilson in the photograph. The care taken here is evident. Someone experienced prepared him, likely a mortician working quickly that morning. His eyes appeared to have been fixed open or painted later. His colleagues positioned themselves to support him discreetly. Emily shared what she had learned about Wilson's contributions and his colleagues' decision to include him. Hammond nodded thoughtfully. This wasn't just following cultural practice. It was a specific choice made out of genuine respect and a sense that his contribution transcended physical death. They weren't just photographing his body. They were insisting on his presence at the moment of success. How do we present this to modern viewers who might find it disturbing? Emily wondered. "Context is everything," Hammond advised. "This photograph captures a moment of transition in our cultural relationship with death. By the 1930s, such practices were fading as death became increasingly medicalized and removed from daily life. Your photograph stands at that cusp, still embracing older traditions while celebrating modern medical advancement," Emily left with a deeper appreciation of how the seemingly macabre practice reflected a fundamentally different relationship with mortality, one where death didn't necessarily sever a person's place among their colleagues, especially at a moment of shared achievement they had made possible. To understand the full significance of the photograph, Emily needed to investigate the medical procedure it commemorated. After obtaining special permission to access century-old patient records, she discovered the file of Samuel Blackwood, the patient whose life had been saved by Wilson's innovative techniques. Blackwood, a 32-year-old dock worker and father of 3, had been admitted on April 16, 1914, with a stab wound to the chest sustained during a waterfront altercation. The knife had penetrated between his ribs and into his heart, an injury considered almost universally fatal in 1914. The emergency physician's initial assessment was blunt. Patient presence with penetrating chest wound, likely cardiac involvement, prognosis extremely poor. Notify family of likely fatal outcome. But a notation changed everything. Dr. Wilson notified per new protocol for cardiac trauma cases. Patient identified as candidate for experimental procedure. The detailed surgical notes, written in Dr. Harrington's precise handwriting, revealed the groundbreaking nature of the operation. Procedure begun at 7:15 a.m. Surgical team, Drs. Harrington, Mills, Carter, Peterson, Young, and Thompson, following protocol established by Dr. Wilson, deceased 4:17 a.m. this day. Thoracic access achieved through 5th intercostal space. Significant hemorrhage controlled using Wilson clamp design. Pericardium opened, revealing 2.3 cc laceration to right ventricle with active bleeding. Heart temporarily stabilized using gauze packing and specialized pressure technique per Wilson protocol. Laceration. Repaired using Wilson's silk suture method with custom curved needles. 3 interrupted sutures placed successfully despite cardiac motion. Particular attention paid to suture depth per Wilson's specifications. Throughout procedure, patient's temperature maintained using warming devices as specified in Wilson protocol. Heart rhythm initially irregular but stabilized by 8:12 a.m. Procedure concluded at 9:10 a.m. Emily consulted with Dr. Michael Chen, a cardiac surgeon, to understand the technical significance. These techniques were remarkably advanced for 1914, Chen explained after reviewing the documents. Wilson's approach to controlling blood flow while maintaining cardiac function, his specialized instruments, his suturing method. These concepts wouldn't become standard until the 1940s and 50s. How significant was this surgery historically? Emily asked. Immensely significant, Chen replied. Before this, the heart was considered surgically untouchable. A successful repair of a ventricular laceration in 1914 with patient survival, that was revolutionary. Emily tracked Blackwood's recovery through subsequent records. He had remained hospitalized for 3 weeks, returned to work 4 months after surgery, and been described as fully recovered at his 1-year examination. Most remarkably, Blackwood had lived until 1967, dying at age 85 from pneumonia. His file included periodic check-ins over decades, each confirming the long-term success of the procedure. He had fathered 2 more children after his surgery, seen his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and worked until retiring in his 60s, all from a wound that should have been fatal. There's a beautiful symmetry. Emily told Dr. Reed, Wilson died of heart failure the same day his innovations saved Blackwood from the same fate. His heart couldn't be saved, but his work saved Blackwood's heart and gave him 5 more decades of life. Emily's investigation led her to Robert Cooper, grandson of William Cooper, the photographer who had captured the historic image. Robert had preserved his grandfather's business records and personal journals in his Cambridge home. My grandfather was meticulous, Robert explained, showing Emily a leather-bound appointment book from 1914. The entry for April 17th read, Mass General Hospital, 11:30 a.m., medical team portrait, urgent request, special circumstances noted, additional fee agreed. More revealing was William Cooper's personal journal entry from that evening, April 17th, 1914. Today presented the most unusual commission of my career. Called to Massachusetts General with great urgency this morning for a medical team portrait. Upon arrival, was informed privately that one of the doctors to be photographed, Dr. Wilson, had died earlier that same day. The team insisted he be included in their photograph commemorating a groundbreaking cardiac procedure he had developed, but did not live to perform himself. They had him dressed in his surgical whites, positioned between Doctors Harrington and Mills, who supported him discreetly from behind. The mortician had done remarkably skillful work preparing him, eyes fixed open, color added to his complexion. From a distance, one might not know he had departed this world hours earlier. The doctors spoke of him with such reverence, I understood their desire to include him in their moment of triumph. His techniques, they said, had made the miracle possible. Dr. Harrington explained that Wilson had developed the surgical approach over years while battling heart disease himself, knowing his own heart might fail before his work was completed. There was poetry in that his methods saved another's heart the very day his own stopped beating. I have taken memorial photographs before, but never one where the deceased was positioned among the living in such a natural grouping. It required special consideration for lighting and positioning. The doctors were determined he should appear as one of them in this historic moment, not as a subject of mourning, but as an equal contributor to their success. Emily was struck by how matter-of-factly Cooper had approached his unusual task. Further evidence of the era's different relationship with death and remembrance. Did your grandfather ever mention this photograph again? Emily asked. He did, Robert confirmed, turning to a later journal entry. 6 months later, he was invited to the hospital to see the photograph displayed in their surgical department. He noted that visitors to the hospital were told the full story of Dr. Wilson's contribution and his presence in the photograph. There was no attempt to hide the circumstances. It was presented as a point of pride that they had honored him this way. Robert showed Emily additional materials from his grandfather's archives, the original glass plate negative of the photograph, technical notes about the specific camera settings and development process used, and a receipt showing the hospital had paid triple the normal portrait. Fee for the special circumstances. My grandfather wrote that this photograph taught him something profound about the medical profession, Robert said. He said it showed him that doctors understand death not as an ending, but as a transition. That Wilson's physical presence in the photograph, even after death, symbolized how knowledge and innovation outlive the innovator. As she carefully examined the glass plate negative, Emily felt a deeper connection to the 7 men captured that day in 1914, 6 living and 1 dead, yet all equally present in a moment of medical history that had saved countless lives in the century since. Emily's research led her to Catherine Wilson, the great-granddaughter of Dr. Thomas Wilson, living in a small town outside Boston. Catherine had inherited a collection of Wilson's personal effects, though she knew little about his medical contributions. The family story was always that he died young, on the verge of important work, Catherine explained as they sat in her living room. but we never knew the details. Among Catherine's collection was a letter from Dr. Harrington to Wilson's parents, dated April 18, 1914. Yesterday, we lost a brilliant surgeon and dear friend. Thomas's heart, which had troubled him since childhood, finally failed him on the very morning we were to perform the procedure he had worked toward for years. In the face of this tragedy, we proceeded with the surgery using his techniques. The operation was a complete success. The patient will recover fully. After consideration, and with hospital approval, we included Thomas in our team photograph. We felt his contribution deserved recognition and that he should be present for this historic moment. The photograph will hang in the hospital as a testament to his vision. I hope you find comfort knowing that though he did not live to see it, Thomas's work will save countless lives. A second letter from Wilson's mother to Harrington expressed gratitude. We take comfort knowing Thomas remained with his team through their triumph. That he was not simply set aside upon his death, but honored as the vital member he was, brings us peace. The photograph you sent will be treasured by our family. Emily gently asked about the family's reaction to the postmortem photograph. They saw it as a tremendous honor, Catherine explained. My great-grandmother kept the photograph prominently displayed until her death in 1946. There was no discomfort about it, quite the opposite. The family felt Thomas had achieved a form of immortality through his work, and the photograph symbolized that his contribution continued beyond his physical life. Catherine showed Emily additional family materials, Wilson's medical school diploma, notebooks filled with his early surgical observations, and a pocket watch that had stopped at 4:17, the moment of his death, which his parents had preserved under glass. Most moving was Wilson's own letter to his parents, written a month before his death when his health had begun to deteriorate rapidly. My heart weakens daily, but my work accelerates. I have developed techniques that could transform cardiac surgery, making survivable what has always been fatal. Should I not live to implement these methods myself, I have prepared my team to carry forward without me. This is the strange comfort of medicine, that our knowledge outlives our bodies, that we may save others from the very conditions that claim us. Death may take my pulse, but not my purpose. Catherine was moved to tears learning the full story of her great-grandfather's contribution and the unusual tribute paid to him. They treated death differently then, more as a transition than an ending, she reflected. I find it beautiful that they kept him present for that moment of triumph. Before Emily left, Catherine made a decision. The hospital should have these materials for your exhibition. Thomas's work happened there, and that's where this story belongs. These items have been in boxes for decades. Now they can help people understand both his medical contribution and this remarkable photograph. Emily's investigation next led her to Richard Blackwood, Samuel's grandson, who possessed family letters from 1914. In his suburban Boston home, Richard showed Emily his grandfather's correspondence. Grandfather never knew the full truth, Richard explained. He was told his surgery was groundbreaking, but not that his surgeon had died that morning. Samuel's letter to his wife, dated April 25th, 1914, read, "The doctors say my recovery is miraculous. Dr. Harrington led the team using a new method developed by Dr. Wilson, who apparently passed away shortly after my operation. Nurse Jenkins whispered that something extraordinary happened during my surgery, but no one will speak plainly about it. I owe this man my life, yet I never met him conscious." Emily explained the truth to Richard, that Wilson had died before the surgery, but had developed the techniques that saved his grandfather, and that Wilson appeared in the commemorative photograph taken afterward. So this doctor, Wilson, had already died when they saved my grandfather? Richard asked, visibly moved. Yes, he died that morning of heart failure. But his team performed the surgery using his techniques, saving your grandfather from what would have been a fatal wound. Richard retrieved a small wooden box from his study. Grandfather kept this until his death. Inside was a pocket watch inscribed, "To Samuel Blackwood, every heartbeat is a gift. Mass General Surgical Team 1914. This was delivered anonymously on the 1-year anniversary of his surgery, Richard explained. He never knew its significance. Emily recognized the watch from Wilson's personnel file. It had been his prized possession, a gift from his father. He had apparently arranged for it to be given to Blackwood after his death. Dr. Wilson wanted your grandfather to have this, Emily said softly. It was his most treasured possession. Richard turned the watch over in his hands. Suddenly, a tangible connection to the century-old sacrifice that had allowed his family to exist. 3 generations of my family owe our lives to this man, he said. My grandfather lived 53 more years after that surgery. Had children, grandchildren. I have 5 great-grandchildren now. Richard showed Emily family photographs spanning the century. Samuel recovering in the hospital in 1914. Samuel with his growing family in the 1920s and 30s. Samuel as an elderly man surrounded by descendants at his 80th birthday in 1962. Would it be possible to include some of these in your exhibition? Richard asked. To show what came from that single surgery, all these lives that wouldn't exist without Dr. Wilson and his team? Emily nodded, recognizing the powerful addition these images would make. The 1914 photograph had captured a moment where the boundary between life and death seemed permeable, a deceased doctor appearing among his living colleagues. Now, the Blackwood family photographs would show the ripple effects of that moment through time, dozens of lives that existed because a dying doctor had raced to perfect his techniques before his own heart failed. "There's one more thing," Richard said, retrieving a final document. Samuel's journal from his hospital stay. The entry for April 18th, 1914 read, "Dr. Harrington visited today and sat beside my bed for nearly an hour. He described how my surgery was performed using techniques developed by the late Dr. Wilson. He said Wilson had worked for years to perfect these methods, knowing his own heart might fail him. 'Your heart lives because his work outlived his heartbeat,' Harrington told me. I shall never forget those words." As Emily prepared her exhibition featuring the 1914 photograph, controversy erupted within the hospital. The ethics committee convened an emergency session to discuss whether the postmortem photograph should be publicly displayed. "This crosses professional boundaries," Dr. Patricia Winters argued during the heated discussion. "Displaying a deceased colleague's body posed as if alive violates modern standards of dignity and consent." "But we must consider historical context," countered Dr. Marcus Johnson. "Well, in 1914, this wasn't considered inappropriate. It was a recognized form of honoring a colleague's contribution. We shouldn't impose present sensibilities on past practices." Emily presented her findings to the committee, including Wilson's documented dedication to his work, his colleagues' decision to honor him through inclusion, and the family letters showing their gratitude for this tribute. "The Wilson and Blackwood families both support including this photograph in the exhibition," Emily explained. "They see it as an important historical artifact that connects to their family histories in meaningful ways." Dr. Reed, supporting Emily's position, added, "We're not displaying this as a curiosity or sensation. We're presenting it as a thoughtful examination of changing medical traditions and professional remembrance." The debate expanded beyond the committee. Medical historians from Harvard argued that the photograph represented a lost chapter in both cardiac surgery development and professional commemoration practices. Ethics professors countered that displaying post-mortem images, even historical ones, risked normalizing practices now considered problematic. The hospital's public relations team worried about potential negative publicity, while the education department saw valuable teaching opportunities about both medical history and cultural attitudes toward death. Emily found herself defending her research against charges of sensationalism. "This isn't about exploiting death," she explained repeatedly. "It's about understanding a different relationship with mortality and professional legacy. The 1914 team saw no contradiction in having their deceased colleague present for their moment of triumph. His contribution had transcended his physical death." After weeks of debate, the committee reached a decision. The photograph would be included in the exhibition with comprehensive historical context, explaining postmortem photography traditions. There would be clear advance notices for visitors, allowing those uncomfortable with such images to choose whether to view it. The decision came with specific guidelines. The exhibition must present multiple perspectives on the ethical considerations, both historical and contemporary. It must explicitly address changing standards of consent and dignity. And most importantly, it must center the human story. Wilson's race to develop his techniques before his heart failed, the team's determination to honor their colleague, and the generations of Blackwoods who existed because of that singular surgery. Medical history isn't always comfortable by modern standards, Dr. Reed observed as the final exhibition plan was approved. But understanding these differences helps us recognize how attitudes toward death, remembrance, and professional legacy have evolved. This photograph tells an important story about both medical innovation and changing cultural practices. Emily realized that the controversy itself had added an important dimension to the exhibition, illustrating how dramatically cultural attitudes toward death, photography, and memorialization had transformed in the century since 7 doctors had gathered on the hospital steps for a photograph that bridged the boundary between life and death. 3 months later, Emily stood in the hospital's main hall, surveying the completed exhibition, Innovation and Remembrance, the 1914 cardiac team. At its center stood the photograph, now famous within hospital circles with Wilson's face, illuminated by subtle lighting. The exhibition didn't shy away from complexity. It presented primary documents, including Wilson's consent forms and the team's detailed records. It acknowledged the ethical questions such postmortem photography raises, while contextualizing the practice within 1914's cultural landscape. Most powerfully, it featured the Blackwood family tree, a sprawling display showing the 5 generations that existed because of that controversial surgery. Richard Blackwood had provided family photos spanning the century, each representing lives that would never have existed without Wilson's innovation. On opening night, Emily observed medical professionals from around the world engaged in passionate discussion. Some defended the 1914 team's decision to include Wilson, others questioned it. All recognized the case's profound importance to medical history. Dr. Chen joined Emily by the photograph. "You've done something remarkable here," she said. "You've made people think beyond simple judgments." "I wanted to honor the full truth," Emily replied. The hospital board remained divided until the end, Dr. Chen admitted. What convinced them was realizing that history isn't always comfortable, but it's always instructive. Emily noticed Richard Blackwood standing before Wilson's photograph, the pocket watch in his hands, creating a perfect circle of connection across time. The doctor, the patient, on the lives that flowed from that singular moment in medical history. Catherine Wilson stood nearby, examining her great-grandfather's surgical instruments in their display case. The two families, connected by a heart that stopped and a heart that was saved on the same April morning in 1914, had met for the first time at this exhibition. Medical students clustered around the technical displays, examining Wilson's innovative instruments and surgical diagrams with professional curiosity. Many expressed amazement at how advanced his techniques had been for the era. The most thought-provoking section presented changing attitudes toward death and remembrance across the 20th century, tracing the decline of postmortem photography alongside the increasing medicalization and institutional management of death. Visitors lingered here, contemplating how dramatically cultural practices had shifted in just a few generations. What would Wilson think of all this? Dr. Hurt Reed asked, joining Emily as the evening concluded. Emily considered this. I think he'd be pleased that his work is being recognized, but I suspect he'd be more interested in how cardiac surgery has evolved since his time. His focus was always on the medicine, on saving lives. Everything else was secondary. Reed nodded, including his own mortality. Especially that, Emily agreed, gazing at the photograph where Wilson stood among his colleagues, physically deceased, yet professionally present in their moment of shared triumph. 1 year after the exhibition's opening, Emily published a comprehensive paper on postmortem photography in medical contexts, using the 1914 team photograph as her central case study. Her work had expanded to explore how different cultures and time periods honored deceased colleagues and preserved their contributions. The photograph had found a permanent home in the hospital's main hall, with comprehensive context explaining both its medical significance and the postmortem photography tradition. Far from causing discomfort, it had become a point of reflection for medical professionals on how the profession acknowledges mortality and remembers its. Pioneers of medical schools had incorporated the Wilson case into their history of medicine curriculum, using it to discuss not only technical innovations, but also the evolution of professional commemorative practices and ethical frameworks around death. On the 111th anniversary of the groundbreaking surgery, descendants of all 7 doctors and the Blackwood family gathered on the same hospital steps where the original photograph had been taken, creating a modern image that honored both the medical breakthrough and the unusual way the original team had chosen to include their deceased. Colleague Emily watched as Catherine Wilson placed a single white rose on the steps, symbolizing her great-grandfather's presence. They didn't see death as a reason to exclude him from their triumph, Catherine reflected. They understood that his mind, his innovations, remained present even after his heart failed. The most profound outcome was the establishment of the Wilson Blackwood Fellowship for Cardiac Research and Medical Ethics, funded jointly by both families to support physicians committed to advancing heart surgery while thoughtfully navigating ethical boundaries. Richard Blackwood, speaking at the fellowship's inaugural ceremony, articulated its purpose. From a single moment in 1914 when a team of doctors refused to let death have the final word, either for their colleague or their patient, generations of lives have flowed. This fellowship continues that legacy, acknowledging that medicine always exists at the boundary between mortality and possibility. As twilight fell on the anniversary gathering, Emily stood back from the assembled families, watching as they shared stories connecting their intertwined histories. The 1914 photograph had transcended its original purpose to become a multifaceted historical document, evidence of medical innovation, a record of cultural practices now faded from common use, and a reminder of how a group of doctors had refused to let death erase their colleague from their moment of shared achievement. The photograph remained powerful, precisely because it captured a moment of transition in medical science, in cultural attitudes toward death, and in one man's race to complete his life's work before his own heart failed. In that frozen moment on the hospital steps, 7 doctors stood together at the cusp of modern cardiac surgery, one physically deceased, but intellectually present, all united in their determination to challenge the boundaries of what medicine could accomplish.